I'd just like to welcome everyone to this, our first meeting of 2023, held on the 6th of September, which is 20 years since the original meeting that was held back in 2003 of the Coal River Working Party. So we're basically having a celebration of 20 years at this community, history, university, business interaction. So I'd just like to acknowledge that we're beaming in from Awabakal country, and we pay our respects to Aboriginal people across this land and across our land, and we pay our respects to elders, both past, present, and those yet to be and emerging. And I wish to pay my respects to also the various lands that the Aboriginal people from the lands that you're all beaming into us today, and pay my respects as well. Also, welcome any Indigenous people here to these proceedings, and you can disrupt and interrupt as much as you can at any point, if you so do wish. Anyway, Anne, over to you for some Zoom etiquette. This is a hybrid meeting, so we're coming to you both physically in the room at the university and also via Zoom. So over to you, Anne, for some Zoom etiquette.
Thank you. And sorry, can everybody hear everyone in the room here? Yes, good. Yeah, thanks for those couple of little technical issues at the beginning, but just as usual, if people Zooming in can just put themselves on mute so that there's no background interference. There will be plenty of time for discussion and people able to sort of reminisce and talk about the group and its history. You're also welcome to put any questions or any comments in the chat, but if you'd like to talk, just click the reactions button down at the bottom of the Zoom screen and put your hand up. That way we won't have people talking over each other. It's probably going to be the easiest way to manage a session like this.
Great, thank you, Anne. Okay, so we're pulling together for the first part of this gathering the class of 2003, which consists of Doug Lithgow and Professor Eric Eklund, and also John Fryer, who I thought was part of the class of 2003, but I noticed from the minutes that were so diligently kept that he couldn't be there, just like I couldn't be there. So, but I will include him anyway. Okay, and then we have also Associate Professor Nancy Cushing, who's joining us, and also Dr. Peter Holmes, Head of Knowledge at the Australian Maritime Museum. So both Doug is the reason why this whole thing started in 2003. I mean, he is the president of the Parks and Playgrounds Movement, community organisation, as well as the Freeman of the City of Newcastle. Emeritus Professor John Fryer is our Professor of Surveying, and he's still hugely involved with students and has been involved with all our surveying work over the years. Professor Eric Eklund, who we haven't seen, or I haven't seen in quite some time. How are you going, Eric? Was a professor and head of school at Monash University from 2008 to 2012, and a deputy to the Pro-Vice Chancellor at Monash Berwick in 2013. He completed a 2-year appointment as the Keith Cameron Chair of Australian History at University College Dublin in 2015 and 2016. His work received a commendation in the 2021 Victorian Community History Awards. His 2002 book, Steel Town, The Making and Breaking of Port Kembla, is a past winner in the Community and Regional History category of the 2003 New South Wales Premier's History Awards. He has written extensively on regional Australia in fields including labour history, heritage studies, social history, social policy and regional development. And he was the inaugural chair of the Coal River Working Party that basically administered this from the university's end. Associate Professor Nancy Cushing's work has influenced it's incredible, especially that presentation that she gave, I don't know when, with that page of an ordinary index page of any Australian book, and Newcastle wasn't mentioned at all in the story of the making of an Australian nation. So she is like our, I don't know what you would call it, our secret fire in the belly type of person. She is Associate Professor in Australian History in the School of Humanities, Creative Industries and Social Sciences at the University of Newcastle. She is a group leader for historical, cultural and critical inquiry. Her primary research area is Australian environmental history, in particular human and other animal relations, with a secondary interest in the history of Newcastle and its entanglements with coal, Environmental History Network and the Australian Historical Association, teaching and learning and sustainability portfolios. And lastly on the panel is Dr. Peter Hovens, Head of Knowledge, Australian Maritime Museum, and great and close friend and hero of the Fortress Newcastle project, in my opinion, and in most people up here. Dr. Peter Hovens is a historian and curator with a passion for publication and community engagement. He leads the exhibitions, curatorial, library and publications teams at the Australian National Maritime Museum. He's chair of the Professional Historians Association in New South Wales and the ACT, and a councillor of the Royal Australian Historical Society, where he heads the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group. Peter has also been a keen, long-distance member of the Fortress Newcastle team, and in his spare time, he enjoys exploring World War II bunkers and op shops. So now, the general frame of this is that I'm going to ask the original class of 2003 some questions. So, Eric, John, and Doug, the Coal River Plot, what did you expect to achieve back in 2003?
Well, I'm happy to start. Am I online? I must have missed that first meeting because I must have been playing tennis forever, because we were playing tennis together at that stage. And as people probably heard, my background was in surveying, aerial photography, map making, and I've really been surprised how much help that I've been able to give to people who are much, much better at history and more knowledgeable about it than myself. I suspect it was because I had some lucky connections. I was 32 years on the Board of Surveyors of New South Wales, and that worked out of the Land Titles Office and the Registrar General's Department, and those people gave me a great contact to anything to do with mapping. And when you say what we were interested in, I'm extremely proud of just a few projects that I was involved in, especially early on, getting the dual naming up for Nobbies and other places. That I look back on my records, I had correspondence firing between 2008 and 2013 over that, and it was only because the chairman of the Board of Surveyors happened to be the chairman of the Geographic Names Board at the right time that we got that up, because people weren't very interested then, and that's only 15 years ago. The discovery of Thomas Mitchell's field notes, he came to Newcastle in 1828, and his field notes seemed to get lost until 2008. 180 years later, Russell Rigby produced them from the Mitchell Library, and that started a whole lot of projects off, especially since Thomas Mitchell was always writing down the Aboriginal names for things. And so we got first-hand the dual naming stuff. And other projects which involved maps were the Macquarie Pier, the coal mines at Fort Scratchley, and I had all the early correspondence on writing to Tony Robinson in England and trying to get him interested that Newcastle was a place he could do a television program on. And it took about, I don't know, 5 or 10 years before that saw the light of day. So if I'm allowed to reflect, I just think that nothing would have happened without our chairpersons, Eric, and especially Joni and Anne. They've done all the hard yards. I think the development of the website, I think, is the key factor, because I know countless people, researchers, who've had great success with their work by going through the website that Joni has developed, and the recording of all the little bits and pieces we've done in such a electronic accessible form. I think that's been the key to our success. And if I'm asked for the future, and I'm getting all my lollies in at once here, I think we just got to keep doing what we're doing. We just got to be open to any project that comes along. We have a wide range of people with a lot of experience here, and we just follow them up, and we don't know what we'll develop from them. So lots of things developed there in those early days that we've done. We had no idea we were going to do that when we started. And I would say we're now 20 years down the track, and we've got no idea what will happen in the next 20 years. And all we can do is just work away as we are, spreading tentacles out and letting people know about it and keeping up that huge website of background information, because one thing feeds onto another. Anyway, I have my 2 bobs worth.
Thank you, John. Eric.
Good.
Yes. Thanks, Gianni.
Do you still have our little coal trophy that we gave you at the
I
conclusion?
do. Yes. It's on the wall in the other room here.
Okay.
It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and to think back and reflect on what's been achieved. And I guess I start with Gianni's email, which was, I can't believe it's 20 years, which just goes without saying, but I just keep sort of coming back to that main point. If the question was, what did I hope to achieve, or what did I hope we would achieve, I honestly didn't know. And I think that part of the secret of this initiative is to throw everything up in the air and to see what landed. I felt like it was something special. I thought like it was something different, because it suddenly, as a senior lecturer with a lot to learn, suddenly I was talking to people across the university that I'd never even met. So it took me outside of the school, and it took me outside of the campus, and just intrinsically I thought, well, there's got to be something good that comes out of that. So my own perspective on it was that let's just see what comes out of it. And while we had a pretty open, process orientated kind of approach, which just sort of naturally evolved, I think, we were nonetheless pretty disciplined around housekeeping and agendas and minutes. So there was a nice, I think, balance between structure and let's see where we're going. I do recall a first meeting with Cynthia Hunter and Doug Lithgow in the McMullen building. I'm still upset about losing McMullen building, if you let me say that to those present, in my office, in my old office in McMullen building. And what they put to me was that they had reached an impasse. And so somewhere in my mind, I think it probably crystallised later on, is that maybe there was a way that the university could play some kind of role which transcended the old sort of knowledge transfer idea, is that, here were the experts up on the hill at Callaghan, telling everyone, what to think and how to think it. And this was a kind of a project which embodied multidisciplinary knowledge exchange. I think we really prefigured the whole engagement and impact focus by, a good decade or so. So in terms of the structure, I think it was really innovative, and so there was always something good that was going to come out of it. And I guess the final thing I'll say is that it's a real testament to the university that the initiative is still going, even if it has, a new structure and a slightly, been rebadged these days. I tried to develop similar approaches in regional Victoria, in Gippsland, and drew upon the model of the Coal River Working Party. And, we had some success, but the university here was a very temporary supporter, if you like. And when we lost that original impetus to do something here, a lot of the community reps said to me that was their primary criticism of the university as they had engaged with it, that there wasn't a longevity to their engagement with the community, and it chopped and changed according to internal agendas, even just changing a name often people found difficult to follow. So that consistency and follow through over many, many years, in fact, 2 decades, I think is a wonderful asset to build upon, and I hope might be a way that group members can make the case to the university and others that longevity is a really powerful asset, that you have so much now that you can draw upon to underpin what you're doing now and into the future.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, well, it's a great resource because, I mean, we just keep directing students whenever they've got an inquiry about something. It's like having a fantastic archive of answered questions, with so much more to come. All right, Doug, where are you? You're in the room, aren't you?
Yes,
There you go.
Janie. I must admit, I'm very proud of what's happened and the way it's developed. But to start with, it was very tentative, and really it started from my interest in the Coal River was directed to Nobbies, the breakwater, and the convict remains in Newcastle, and it just seemed to not get anywhere with these things. And Cynthia was on our committee, the Parks and Playgrounds Movement, and we approached Trevor Waring was in the first instance. He was Chancellor, yes, and he was very, very supportive of the idea and introduced us to Gail White, and what it came out of was the the idea of connecting the university to the community, and that was the base, and the idea was that academic rigour would be applied to the ideas and the resources that came forward, and it worked very well. And I think it is still actually working its way through that important connection between the university and the community. Now, the Parks and Playgrounds Movement, in conjunction with the National Trust, you might recall, and Eric would remember, we were trying to get the Newcastle Council and the Newcastle community interested in the 200th anniversary. You remember, Eric? And we produced from the workshop that we had at the museum in Newcastle, and we'd been, Parks and Playgrounds have been working on this since 1968, from the point of view of various issues. For instance, it started first with a proposal to level all the dunes at Nobbies and make it into car parking, and off the convict breakwater. And we just pointed out that this is really a historic site. We should be recognising it as such. Anyway, this committee was influential in getting the whole thing on the New South Wales Heritage List. So in other words, it's now it's called the Coal River Precinct on the Heritage List. Now that was a great contribution for the university and the community to achieve, but it needs to go further. And you can see what the problems that have happened in the community in losing their corporate memory. That's what Newcastle has lost, its corporate memory. And there's been changes in the university, big changes. And the first big change, as Eric was saying, it was we lost our concept with connection of the community and the university. That was the first thing, because the university got more interested in, naturally, in overseas students, because overseas students were paying students, and there was money to be made. And that really destroyed their first efforts. And we went to Kevin McConkie, I remember, Cynthia and myself, and we made a very plea to him to re-establish the funding and facilitation of the what was called the Coal River Working Party. And we had actually found, we'd achieved the Coal River Working Party. The idea was to go on to the next stage. And thankfully, the people that came forward, we've gone on to the next stage with the Hunter Living Histories, opened up to a really amazing scene for the people of the Hunter. But Jeremy's been a very special person in this, because he's opened it up to the whole world. And that's what's happening today, even with this meeting. It's open to the world. Thanks, Johnny, and thanks for all the people that have been involved. Now, I'm just 90 years old, and I'm really pleased that we've got to this stage, but we must press on.
Thank you, Doug. Keep living.
Well, I was sorry to hear one of my dearest neighbours departed. Charles,
I know.
was a member of this meeting.
Yeah. Well, Charles is very special, and yeah, we'll speak more on Charles later. But anyway, Anne, we'll play you. I mean, I wanted to do this timeline over the last 2 weeks, but work got in the road, and I just want to thank Anne and Chelsea, the work integrated learning student, who actually created a timeline of our achievements from 2003. Anne, are you happy to play that? Can you
show the timeline?
Yeah.
Sure thing.
So
I'll share it now while we're talking, and Chelsea's zooming in.
Yep.
So if anyone's got any questions for myself or Chelsea, we've embedded the timeline, it's the wrong one, into the February showcase blog post. So if you scroll down, so it was this time last week that Chelsea started creating the timeline. So both her and I went back through different posts, through minutes, so starting in 2003, and just putting, not everything up, of course, but just a summary of like the beginnings, who was involved. We've added the first minutes, just those key milestones that Doug's spoken and John has spoken a bit about, those foundations of the focus being on Coal River and Inner Newcastle. So it goes all the way up.
And I just want to shout out to Peter Sherlock and Monteithan Powers, who in that early period helped immensely with the rediscovery of the convict coal mines. This was a great, I mean, we were good with community, we were good with the university, but having businesses on board that could help us out and organising all this huge equipment was just amazing, you know. So everyone just pulled together to verify this historical stuff, not just through the paper base, but also having gigantic big gears in there that could drill into walls. So, so thank you very much, Peter. I know you're there.
We also have Roz Kerr with us at the meeting physically today. So Roz is one of the other really early members of the group as well. And thanks,
Yep.
Roz, for all your reports on geology. And as you can see, there was quite a geology, engineering, surveying focus early, but we've been able to document specifically since 2017, a lot of the work integrated learning projects and interaction with the community. So it's there for anyone to have a look at and yeah, have a browse at the different milestones.
Yep. Ros helped uncover the gunpowder tunnels inside Nobbies that no one believed were there. So we've had really an assortment of great stars that have worked with us over the years. Anyway, they're all there. But yeah, look, the work with Aboriginal Newcastle has been quite, to me, the most important, especially with what happened at the site of the KFC in Newcastle West. I mean, that triggered a review of the legislation, and it was thanks to a number of MPs in the upper house that really forced that. And I think it's been part of what we've been doing to really put information out there and then enable people to change things for the better. So, okay. Now over to Nancy and Peter. I want to know, is this stuff, I mean, I know, Nancy, that you've written on this before. I mean, part of the problem that we had is once we went to a national nomination, we just couldn't get one up because Newcastle's story just wasn't nationally known. And we had to do a rethink in terms of, well, there's no point trying to convince the nation that Newcastle's important when most of the people in Newcastle and the Hunter region don't know it either. So it really took us back to square one to really start flooding the web with information about ourselves and verifying historical information, both with the stories that have gone around about it, but also the factual data. So I guess my question to you, Nancy and Peter, Peter as observers and inspirers, is this stuff significant? Do any similar models like this exist anywhere else?
Shall I go first, Peter? You all right with that? Okay. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this. I've just admired this group for so long, and I've really, taken advantage of a lot of the work that you've done, which it's been wonderful to have it here. So just a little bit of my background, and I'll bring it around to exactly the points that Johnny was just raising. So I became involved in the history of Newcastle about 30 years ago when I arrived in the city looking for a PhD topic. And I decided at that point, based on my honors research, which I did in Canada and was about the South African War, I thought, no, I'm definitely always going to do big projects now on the place that I'm in. So I was going to be in Newcastle, so I figured it would be on Newcastle. But having recently arrived from Canada, I had lots of questions about the history of Newcastle and its status within the country. Like, why, when I traveled from Sydney to Newcastle, did I take a country train and not an intercity train? Thought that was weird. Why did people in Sydney question why I would even want to go to Newcastle and do that face like, ooh, Newcastle, why are you going there? And what did that say about the Australian urban system and where an industrial and mineral extraction based city sat within it? And so my 1995 PhD thesis was on perceptions of Newcastle. It was the outcome of some of these early questions that I had. But I now look back on the breathtaking arrogance of that young woman thinking that I would just rock into a city and write its history. And I was really very fortunate in having John Turner appointed as my thesis supervisor. He was a history academic at that point, but he had been a school teacher and he came into the university through the community programs element. So working with John, it soon became clear that while Newcastle's history had to a large degree been overlooked by academic historians, as Johnny was just pointing out, it was alive and well in the hands of a range of local historians. And he always worked very closely with them. And I guess that idea of debate and discussion was also very healthy. And I remember when John Turner would go on, he had regular radio spot, and he would say something, and then it would sort of be the talk of the town. Did you hear what John Turner said? That's not right. I know what's right. This. So that really was my introduction to this broader history of Newcastle. And I wondered if it wasn't perhaps not a coincidence that the Coal River Working Party had its start just a few years after the death of John Turner in 1998, and that maybe in his absence, a more formalized link between community and university it was missing. And so I've watched with interest as this group has gone from strength to strength, and I've really admired its achievements. And I think someone's already used the term innovation, and I think that's a term that is so overused and it's really on the nose, and everything's being claimed as an innovation. But that's what I see just endlessly from this group, a lot of it coming from the fertile mind of Johnny DeGravio. And indeed, when I realized when I was putting these remarks together that I wasn't quite sure where Hunter Living Histories starts and ends, and where it's the university archives, and where it's just, you know, you guys doing amazing things. What's the GLAMAX lab, and how can we separate these out? And I think it's probably not fruitful to try to separate them out. I think they are all very much interconnected. But just to focus on one aspect, these Hunter Living History meetings as a forum have been so valuable for so many of us, and I'm sure that's why people are here today. Listening to colleagues report on research conducted using the Janet Copley research grants, listening to guest speakers that have a particular interest in the Hunter but can bring new insights to people that know a lot more about the broader context, as well as the reports from regular participants from their own speaking positions within councils or in private enterprises, Johnny's mentioned. Last year, you had the theme of bringing attention to less studied aspects of the past, and that created an opportunity for one of my students in an environmental history course to share her work. And of course, everything is then beautifully packaged up into the blog posts, which create an ongoing record, which help to get work that would not have a broad audience beyond me, just as the marker, to anyone who happens upon them, and something the student can point to and say, look, this is some of the work that I did at university. This is part of my portfolio. And it's been great for people like Howard Bridgman. I'm not sure if Howard's here today, you know, coming into history at a late stage in his career, but this has been a great place to get that mutual support and advice on projects that he's running, the weather histories he's looking at. And I just say it's not just the content that's shared in the meetings, but the style of discourse, which is so refreshing. I think these are run with another buzzword of the period, kindness. And we can launch into something like Lost Newcastle on Facebook and find that kindness does not always reign supreme in the world of local history. Sometimes people are downright nasty. And part of that is driven by their firm commitment to one particular set of facts or interpretations of what they believe that they know. And I think that this has been a great forum to be able to get people to bring forward the evidence that supports what they believe, and to see that perhaps there is a different way of looking at things. And so the blog posts arising from the meetings that are so carefully constructed to provide a very balanced treatment of a topic, supported at each step by primary documents and by the sort of research that Johnny was referring to, into the material evidence of the past, maps and plans and contemporary artworks, all of that deployed. And often it isn't for a kind of argument, but to just say, well, look, here it is, have a look, make your own call on this. And I think that by doing that, people are engaged, but it allows us to come to some common understandings, and not just to refight the same old battles, but to provide a firm foundation on which histories of the Hunter can be built and go forward in new directions. And I've really seen those new directions with the inclusion of First Nations people and the LGBTQI community as well, recently coming through in Hunter Living Histories. So for me, this is history at its best, and one of the greatest contributions from this group. And I thank you so much for the time and effort it's taken to sustain it over 2 decades, and wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But we do work within an atmosphere of extreme generosity. You know, Charles, who passed away and we went to his memorial, he's the most giving, generous person. I mean, in terms of all his work that he's done. And, you know, it just makes you cry thinking about it. So.
Yeah. It is beautiful, and I've always felt that coming along to the meetings, because I am a bit of a blow-in from time to time. I'll be interested in something and want to come along, but if I talk about work that I'm doing, people have so many suggestions and offers of support and help and resources, and it's a beautiful gift economy that's going on within this group.
It is. Peter, over to you. And thank you for joining us. I know you're busy, but I see you like a Newcastle brother in Sydney somewhere. Now, I can't hear you for some reason, but anyway, what's plan B from our end? I'm not sure.
And we can just continue scrolling through that until Peter.
Okay.
So plan B.
Yeah, remind me of this timeline. There's the dual naming. Okay, that's good. There's Charles and Vera with his 34 days. And that was his original virtual. That was his first draft that ended up on the front page of the Herald. The public voice on the Coal River precinct, trying to advocate for the site, give it some recognition. We had some wonderful students working on design plans for buildings for the area. I mean, they ended up putting a racetrack over the top of it with the supercars, but anyway, we did have an alternate view. And it was a beautiful building based upon Indigenous designs. The student, Andrew Cavell, was a big fan of Renzo Piano, and he loved putting Indigenous themes into their architecture. So we still have the model downstairs, and we've got lots of information about it. The formation of the GlamX lab in 2016, I think it was the first in the country to actually begin bringing our students into these interactions with and the Past Matters workshop was a focus on Indigenous heritage in the regions of the Hunter region as well as the Central Coast. There were 2 Past Matters workshops organised by Dr. Anne Hardy and Dr. Amir Moghadam. I don't know if you want to say a few words about that. I don't know if Amir's with us this afternoon, but
yeah,
we had the volunteers. Yep.
I was going to say, I've noticed Peter's joined again. Shall we try again maybe? Peter.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can.
Oh, sorry, I had a feeling that other computer was a bit ropey.
Okay.
Well done for your extempore work yet again, Johnny. Look, I just wanted to firstly acknowledge that I'm joining you from the Bamal and Badu, or the lands and waters of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But in making that acknowledgement, I'm also, of course, sending an apology that I'm not there with you on Worimi and Awabakal land today. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you. But again, another apology. I suspect I was meant to be joining you as a dispassionate observer of Hunter living histories, and I've already failed because I'm a very passionate observer instead. Look, in recent years, I've reviewed the community history scene for a new book that's just come out on the history industry in Australia. And in that book, I had a look at the statement recently put out by the history councils around Australia on the value of history. And I think what really came through in that statement was the fact that history is both essential and challenges that are out there. One is, of course, working out what's the purpose of community history. Another one is why would people be interested in history? What's the viability of doing community-based history? And therefore, what's its sustainability as well? And these are certainly issues I find in my role in the Royal Australian Historical Society, as we find local historical societies closing down or merging as well. But it's not all doom. And I think there's some great positive models out there. For a start, the renaissance in family history and genealogy has been extraordinary over the last 2 decades. I've always been inspired by the automotive heritage scene as well. I mean, I'm not an old car fan particularly, but the way they conduct their communities, and you hold massive events with passionate people who restore and market these historic vehicles and build a really passionate following is a real inspiration, I think. But the two that really come to mind are the Fortress Newcastle project, which I'm sure many of you know about, and of course, Hunter Living Histories. So in terms of thinking about, well, why am I so inspired by Hunter Living Histories? I'm going to start with a few negatives and then a few positives. What I've found in the last few years is that there's many institutions around us that are either closing their doors on their libraries or shutting down community archives, ranging from Heritage New South Wales through to the University of New England, but not Hunter Living Histories. I think many community-based archives are really struggling with materials that aren't paper-based, and therefore in activating their audiovisual and born digital heritage, but again, not Hunter Living Histories. I think many groups who work in community history are really unsure of their reach. They don't know who their audience is, who's interested, or what the impact of their programs is, but not Hunter Living Histories. And I think, the feedback, for instance, the number of views on the Fortress Newcastle film has been an extraordinary case in point. Indeed, the whole Stories of Our Town series has just been amazing to be able to see that measurable impact, and the social echo coming out of it has been wonderful. So then, if there's some of the problems that I think you've overcome, where do we go from here? To me, I'll be echoing some of the comments that we've already heard. I think one of the important ones is to stay local, because to me, history means the most where it actually happened. And as well, even though a lot of us are mobile in our lives, I think we need to be a bit more inclusive in thinking about, well, the when as much as the where. In other words, we need to be constantly looking for new audiences, particularly younger people. And I agree with the comment that we need to be thinking about sustainable long-term programs with a strong brand identity. And that's really hard in that culture of innovation. And this is one of the things that's been so good about Hunter Living Histories, is that stability and that ability to build on a series of achievements and to add to existing content, but to then innovate where you need to create news value, to give political and funding opportunities, and also to find those fresh participants like the students that you've found who are doing the work integrated learning. I think that's fantastic. And to me, speaking as chair of the Professional Historians Association, I'm thrilled when you can show students that there are actually viable careers being historians. And I think the other thing that's come through today is, again, what you do, which is that dovetailing into the emerging heritage environment as well. And I have a strong sense that there's going to be a bit of a sea change, really. I have to say that I work in a maritime museum. There's a real sea change coming through about recognising cultural landscapes. And I think the Hunter region has to be one of Australia's premier wide-scale cultural landscapes. But also, I think maybe we all need to think a little bit harder about what you might call the heritage of the recent past. What does it mean to be saving a 1980s milk bar or a turn of the 21st century internet cafe, for instance? And that leads me to my final suggestion, which is we've got to be thinking really hard about actively recruiting into our digital heritage. 1995, which is when I started my post-university career, is now 3 decades ago. But we've really got to be thinking about moving beyond paper and video and audio tapes into how we recreate the digitally immersed world that people like my 21-year-old son take for granted as well, because to them, that will be their history, that will be their reality that we're trying to capture and present back to them in the future. But look, ultimately, the point I want to leave is the one that was already made, which is keep doing what you're doing. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you. All right. Well, look, the next bit is really just open up to everybody. Where to from here? This year, every year we start with a new slate. So we get our inspirations from meetings such as this to find out from the community what they're interested in, what arguments are raging, what exhibitions are coming up, commemorations, and then we try and join those sorts of things with what our academics and researchers are up to. That's usually what we do. But I just want to open it up to the floor. Everyone's welcome to just join in. Where to from here? What direction would our students, researchers, and communities like to see this year and going into the future? Over to you. Anyone? Speak up.
Yeah, Leslie's gonna.
Okay, can everyone remember when we went through the business of changing the name? To Under Living
I'll just introduce who you are first. Sorry, is that you, Leslie?
Yes.
Leslie Gent, representative of the Friends of the University of Newcastle.
And a group of students, I can't remember where they come from, commerce.
Communications.
They did the study of it. They came along and gave us a wonderful talk about that we were all quite old and we had to get away from the name. Had to have something that hit, like Hunter HLH. And then when I read their proposal, I realised their demographic didn't take in most of us. It was all for younger people. And I'm sitting there and I suddenly said, do you realise that your whole study is aimed at people up to 60? Now, how many people, I mean, Paige excluded there, they go into this type of thing when they've got more time when they retire and put all their study in and doing their PhDs and all this sort of thing. And the young people at the university forgot all about us old folk. But they did a good study just the same, and we took up, we did take up their suggestions, so I suppose and it has worked. I don't know whether anyone agrees with me, but I think it has worked.
Well, the young crew, they said that, look, we love what you're doing, but no one would have known with the name of the Coal River Working Party. They thought we were some political party or we had something to do with the coal industry. So they helped reshape an identity which brought in the entire region. And then someone made the suggestion I think the first draft was Hunter History Initiative. And then someone said, but, you know, there's more than one history. So we said, okay, Hunter Histories Initiative. And then they said, but, you know, histories are always about dead things. Can we put the word living in there? And so I said, okay, we'll put Hunter Living Histories in brackets. And then it became Hunter Living Histories, you know, and then it informed the name of our data platform, which became Living Histories. So it sort of spread a bit like wildfire. So the idea is that, I think it was Robert Watson that said he never got the name until he had to do a special ceremony at Lambton, and they were burying some time capsule, and he needed to get the smallest kids on Earth that could walk, because he said, when this time capsule comes out of the ground, these guys are going to be still here. So it's then that he realized that what living histories are all about, you know, this sort of transmission from the old to the young. Young people aren't always going to be interested in these things, but, you know, we've got to find as many ways to get them involved and produce an opening for them. So they, and look, I need them because I need their views. I need their technological skills at bringing all this stuff together. So I love what those kids did, you know, back in 2016, was it? I can't remember now.
Oh, it's on our timeline.
Yeah, so it's Robert here. Can you hear me? Yeah, so we dug up the World War I time capsule, which of course is old history, dead history, but we buried a new one with the intention that all the preschoolers in Lambton, the 25% of them would reach the age of 100. And so so a quarter of them would be there to dig up the new time capsule. So that was the big aha for me is, oh, we're burying something that is history 100 years into the future. So that was a wake-up call for me. And the other thing I was going to add was my kids are 35, and going back about 3 months ago, one of them rang me up and said, you've got to watch Binge. And I said, what the heck's Binge? They said, oh, the TV show, there's a thing on there, it's called Fortress Newcastle. You've got to watch it. You would love this. This is all about Newcastle. My son is like, oh, he's telling me. And then I got a text message from his wife, who was actually at someone else's house, and she said, you've got to watch Binge. It's all about Fortress Newcastle. So if ever there was a measure of is the Hunter Living Histories and the things we do reaching that younger audience, it was hitting me right in the face. So a big thank you and a big success thing there, I reckon, if you can get
You can get through to my son about history, that's pretty good.
One of the big points that I'd like to make is that when I discovered from Taunton Shortland's actual plan that he actually wrote, his handwork plan, and you were able to see it there. It showed the natives. Gave us the link back to an accurate link, and you can't escape. There the natives are shown on his map at Stockton, on the Stockton side, the Wirramai people, and on the Newcastle side. And I thought that was just so important, and I thought it was so important to get that information to Aboriginal people, because they need that to me is a real standard, and it's so difficult in Newcastle because of the displacement of the Aboriginal people who were so important in the area for so many years.
Thanks for making that point, Doug, because I just realised with what you were saying there that's right. That's the first record from a European of both who we now know as the Awabakal people and Wirramai people, both on the same sketch. You know, the importance with this sketch plan is that by the time this thing was printed in 1810, the natives disappeared. Okay, so that's why you can't have enough maps.
Yeah. See, and that's one of the great things that this committee has been doing, is showing the original material and and making it available to everybody, and it's so important. Especially now as we're changing, you know, from an industrial community and industrial society to a more, have to be a more biologically related society in the future, as global warming clicks in, and we'll need students. Every student that goes to university needs to have a base of using the skills and things that are available, say, from GLAM. I just think it's so important, especially when people doing, as they say these days, engineering and commerce, but I think they will become less important. I think the broader education is going to become really important in the future, even though at the moment it's in the doldrums.
Thanks, Doug.
Now, Jude's
Anyone? Yes, Jude, you've got your hand up, your digital hand.
Hi. You know, I love Hunter Living Histories. I'm so glad to have been involved for a few years now. When I was doing my PhD on the women's movement in Newcastle, and doing background reading on Newcastle history, of which there are a lot of books. They weren't mentioned in the broader textbooks of Australia, but there was a lot of work about Newcastle history, but not much about women in Newcastle. And the Hunter Living Histories website has been, you know, absolutely perfect in starting to upload lots of history, lots of Newcastle women's histories, which is now available for anyone to see online. And I'd like to congratulate, you know, Johnny and Anne for making sure that happened, and also for allowing all us local historians to have a chance to give 20-minute talks at Hunter Living Histories. So congratulations on your anniversary. I hope it goes for many more years.
Thank you, Jude.
Now, Nancy, did you have your hand up?
Sorry, I was just applauding what Jude was saying about the capacity that you have, like an agility to be able to put things up on your site to respond to new research or events that are happening. And it's really nice to have that really quick response time. did have one other thing I'd like to say if no one else is jumping in, and that's to pick up on what Peter was saying about drawing out the future employment potential for people in the broad area of history, and running sessions on employment in the history sector broadly is something that the History Council of New South Wales does quite successfully. And I just wonder if there's some opportunity for a collaborative event. You know, the University of Newcastle is a member of the History Council, to bring some of their structure and have some local speakers as well. Because I think one thing that you do at Hunter Living Histories is to broaden it out, as we've talked about, you know, surveying, engineering, geotechnical work, all can have a historical element to it. And maybe that's something that could be brought into a session like that.
I think that would be great, Nancy. I mean, it's always a marriage of the arts and sciences. One thing that's come recently that I want to revive, if possible, is that years ago when we got, I mean, there's only a limit to how, when we get an inquiry into special collections, we can usually find it. If we can find things quickly, we can. But once we get too buried into an inquiry, then we're in this difficult bind because we just haven't got the time to do a deep dive for people on individual things. Years ago, we used to have a historian who was sort of like a contract worker that we could suggest to people to do that research, especially if they couldn't get to us. So he was like a guy local on the ground that could come and work, be engaged by someone who couldn't get here to do the research. So I'm thinking that might be a great opportunity for, you know, postgrad historians or just anyone that's looking for some employment, that if we had a register of such people that we could use, if we get ourselves into, because we've had a few of these inquiries coming through, it would be wonderful if we could have a pool of researchers that we could engage or refer to our inquirers to engage. And
yeah, that's a great idea. And so one of the things I'm involved in on the Australian Historical Association is their sustainability portfolio. And part of that is to try to stop people from traveling quite so much, especially flying. And so there's a real push on now to have research assistants available associated with repositories who know their way around, and they can do research for people for a fee. So that I think that's a great idea, Johnny.
Yep. Well, so if you can get that moving, I'd love to see something like that, that we can refer our researchers onto. Any other views from the floor? Speak up. Anything? I mean, complain about something. I don't know. Is this something we haven't been doing that you want us to do, or something that will? Yeah.
This is just general observations, and from talking to people this morning, is that one of the positives of COVID has been that all our meetings went online. It actually increased our membership and people were able to Zoom in from anywhere. So there's opportunities. Again, it gets back to the travel, you know, people not having to travel. So, you know, that's been a real positive for our students, for our researchers. We're able to just record, put them up online, use that as a resource as well. So if we get inquiries, we can refer people to different researchers or students that have worked on projects. And also with Chelsea doing the timeline, just that vast difference from 2017 with the change of the name and then the work integrated learning students. We have an intern from the University of Sydney. Just all those possibilities that then helped formulate a little bit more of what the foundations of the group tried to instill, that the students were always involved. And then next year with work integrated learning for all, it's like we've sort of got like all the framework there ready to help support the students. So it's sort of changed a lot, but I think we've been able to adapt as we've gone. Marilla has just sent me a message just saying, could I mention the Vera Deakin Regional History Fund and just share the link in the chat? So I've done that, Marilla. Is there anything more you want to say, Marilla? Oh, yeah.
What photo is she holding up from time to time?
I haven't seen a photo. Do you want to hold it up again?
It's a photo of Vera.
Vera.
Yeah.
Oh, it is too.
There she is.
I'll just save that link in the chat. It's always good to promote.
So how about the younger people? You want to throw in a few 2 bobs worth? I don't mind.
I just say about
No, you're not one of them.
2 bobs worth.
Oh, well, they might not understand what a bob is. Is that right? Is what you're saying? Or what? A coin? An Apple Pay? I don't know.
I guess about the generosity of everyone on.
Would you like to throw a couple of taps worth or something? Is that right?
Generosity of everyone, going right back to dear Russell, who every time we got in touch with Russell, he just gave his time beautifully. Jude, I can name everyone, and they just, when you put a question up, next minute you're inundated with all this information. It's just absolutely wonderful. And I was on the RAHS Council for 6 years. I'm presently the archivist historian for the RAF Association, but I've never come across a group that is so generous with their time and their research, handing it out to other people than this group.
Yeah, we do. I think it was Nancy, you were mentioning about the nastiness that's involved. I mean, yeah, there is a bit. There is a bit in circles, and from my point of view, it's good to have these discussions, especially when you've got the primary materials there, because sometimes you do miss things, or you don't see them properly, or you misread something. The more eyes on something, the better. But you do have characters from time to time that believe they know the truth of something and they won't accept anything else. And so from our point of view, it's really good having different points of view. I remember a few years ago when the family of the descendants of Major Morisset got quite upset with all the history and characterization of him, and they wanted a right of reply. And we gave them that right of reply by putting up a post, and that's been really useful. I mean, really helpful for people to get a much more balanced perspective on that figure, apart from the historical view of him being, King Lash. Same things happened with Aboriginal points of view as well. There's Bob Siren from South Australia. I mean, he's been writing some pretty important information that's really caused some reviews of how, I mean, hasn't kept everyone happy, but the evidence that he has been put up there, and you challenge things according to the evidence. But yeah, it's interesting to not just it's good to entertain these conversations, because history is something that needs to be constantly discussed and reviewed. I mean, the virtues of one age become the vices of the next, and there's no way of really finding a way to bridge those gaps. I mean, when we drilled into those convict coal mines in 2005, the thing that dawned on me gazing into those little black holes was that this whole world is based on some kind of slavery. And the move from a coal, fossil fuel-based economy to one of renewable energy was also a change to a new way of doing power, rather than enslaving peoples, enslaving the world, and enslaving our place. We had to find a new way of doing power and being a bit more cooperative. So we're pulling in as much Indigenous wisdom into that. What the answers are, I don't know, but we can help inspire people on the right path. I always remember whenever we're talking about this question and we're trying to describe problem solving between an Indigenous and a European perspective, I always remember those ants with those wonderful bottoms that there was a program on the 7:30 report, and they showed this ant had some medicinal property in its bottom. And you had these scientists that were in the lab, and they were grabbing each ant and they were pulling its buttock off and shoving the buttock in this little beaker, and then they were throwing the ant to one side. Next ant tear the buttock off, put the buttock in there, and then they'd mix up the solution and they come up with this medicinal, wonderful thing. Then they went to an Aboriginal community and watched what 2 Aboriginal women were doing with the same ants. They went to the ant nest, they grabbed a bit of cloth and they threw the cloth on the ant nest. As the ants went across this cloth, their bums would basically deposit a bit of this compound onto the rag, and then when they were ready, they put the rag on the rash, and that's how the healing was done. And I always ask people, what's the difference? You know, one is a stealing from nature, the other is a cooperation. And so that, I think, is really where we need to head in everything that we do. And that's why embodying Indigenous perspectives is so crucial to all the work we do. So I just want to make that point. Come on, any more thoughts?
Peter's got his hands up.
Can I just say something?
Thanks. Look, I just wanted to add, well, firstly, I have to acknowledge I work for the Australian government, but last Monday, the Minister for the Arts and the Prime Minister announced our new national cultural policy. And I think it's really interesting when we look at the 5 pillars of that policy. After Living Histories ticks at least 4 of those. And if we change the word artist to creator, I'll just put them in the chat, we actually tick all 5 of them. And those pillars are First Nations first, a place for every story and a story for every place, the centrality of the artist, strong cultural infrastructure, and engaging the audience. And I reckon you tick 4 of those 5, and if you change artist to creator, then you're pretty much honouring all 5 of them as well. So I think, you know, basically you're ahead of the curve, and you've certainly got the support of this government's new cultural policy.
Thank you, Peter. God, you're a treasure.
That's great. Well, that's the way to go.
I told everyone about the report, but I never read it. So I'm glad you've summarised it for me. Thank you very much.
Yes, Suzanne Martin wants to say something from here.
Yes, thank you. Look, I have no academic qualifications in history or anything else for that matter. But while I think Zoom has been wonderful when we can't get out and about, I really do miss getting together with the people who are involved with Hunter Living Histories and having a talk to them and sharing ideas either before or after the meeting. And I'd like to see as many people as possible now coming back together every month and getting together again. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Well, look, we're doing both. We're doing a hybrid meeting. Anne's with the physical world in that room that you're in, and I'm in the digital world, making sure that we're looking after everyone. Okay?
Thanks.
All right. No, if
Excelsior.
it's all quiet, we can then, are there any, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our panelists and our speakers. And I'm glad that we've celebrated our 20th anniversary. Now, Anne, have we got any news?
Yes, I might just share just a blog post that I put up a week ago, and that relates to the Fringe Histories program that we trialled last year for the first time. Nancy, I think, mentioned, or one of her students, and Nancy, were part of it last year. So we're just trying to strengthen that and promote it a little bit more across all communities, and particularly students here at the university. So it's a blog post available for people to have a look at, and it's a call out for anyone to contribute a short blog post so we can help them publish it. The themes are up there for this year. Dr. Jude Conway contributed a few posts last year. It's just got the submission dates, how to contact me. This was a post that was put together by Chelsea. So thank you, Chelsea, for doing this. And there's also a few examples of the contributions from last year. So if people want to get any ideas of the type of post, there's no strict format. They can sort of vary depending on what the theme is. Sometimes we're just uploading, adding a link to a video, as we did with Nancy's students. So that's, the only thing I wanted to share. And also to welcome Harper, who's another work integrated learning student with us over the summer school semester. So Harper's here for the rest of this week, and she's been working on the Hannon photographic collection, which is a really large collection that's held in the archives, and it's the very beginning phases, so we're learning a lot. So I just wanted to welcome Harper.
Oh, yes, thank you. So this is the first time that I work in library and do some photo works in this group. So I'm very glad to enjoy our team. So yeah.
It's been good to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Harper.
News?
Thank you, Anne. And you also got a note from Jude about a public lecture?
Yes. Jude, did you want to mention it, or do you want me just to give the information? It's also on the blog post.
Oh, okay. Tomorrow night, Tuesday night. Oh, sorry that it's not my real face, but anyway, haven't brushed my hair yet. Anyway, tomorrow night I'm giving a talk at the Newcastle Family History Society. It's also on Zoom, which will be in the blog post. And it's about Professor Beryl Nasher, who was the Professor of Geology at Newcastle Uni at 25 years. And she's had a very interesting life, having married an Egyptian about the time of the overthrow of King Farouk by Nasser. So if anyone's interested, then come along to the rooms in Lambton, or they can watch on Zoom. Thank you.
Yes, and she was the first female dean of any university in Australia, wasn't she, Jude?
She was the first female dean of a science faculty.
Okay.
Science faculty, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so well, look, I'd really like to end on Charles Martin's video for people to watch through Zoom. So, Anne, I'm wondering if Doug and Harper can cut the cake before we show the video, and then just leave you in the physical room to enjoy the delights of the cake, and the others of us on Zoom can just say our goodbyes to Charles. I don't know, but it's wonderful to have the old and the new. So this is the oldest member, Doug, cutting the cake with the youngest participant.
We thought we'd invite Harper to jointly cut the cake, and she's representing the students. So we might pull the table out, and do you want to stand there?
There you go. So can everyone in Zoom land see? We want you to be part of this historic occasion.
Your hand on us too.
Here we go. So, Doug, say something quite profound about the future of history.
Under Living Histories is a living thing and will go on further.
We hope.
Hooray!
Hooray! Okay, so that's one of the benefits of coming to a physical meeting, is you might get the occasional cake and goodie. All right, so it was great sadness that we farewelled our Charles Martin. I mean, his niece said a wonderful thing at his funeral. She said that to her, because she didn't come from Newcastle, Charles was Newcastle. And I think that he will live on in the beautiful work that he did for us. I mean, a lot of people promised that they could pull together all the historical data, paintings, survey drawings, and accounts into something, and but no one came through. I mean, the guy that came through was Charles, and he was very generous with everything that he did. What we're going to show you is the film that we put together. Now, look, this film, just hang on before I'll do the intros, but we had to basically present this in Brisbane at a conference on virtual heritage, and Charles was still feeding me these fly-throughs at about 12 o'clock at night. So we had to edit all this together. I had to pick a tune, and the tune that we ended up picking was Schubert's Ave Maria, because it was composed in 1825. And look, I just think this is beautiful, very emotional for me watching this, because it's to me, it is Charles. I'm going to miss him so much. We are going to miss him so much. Goodbye, Charles. Farewell. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We'll look forward to the March meeting, or welcome to come along. It looks like it's going to be all about, at this stage, Little Richard and the ring throwing event into Newcastle Harbour. We're going to have some pretty important people there. So it's all about the R's, rock and roll in Newcastle with Little Richard. But for now, farewell, Charles. Newcastle in 1825. Bye-bye. We love you. Thank you and farewell. Here's to Charles.